Coming up in our newscast tonight. President Moon Jae-in is in Singapore meeting with the island nation's prime minister. He's expected to discuss North Korea issues as well. Also, MOUs are signed to boost cooperation in various sectors. South Korea's central bank keeps its key rate steady but doesn't leave out the possibility of a hike in H2 while lowering its growth forecast for the local economy, mainly due to risk factors like trade conflict. Seoul's finance chief convenes a meeting with top econ officials. Key topics, job creation and repercussions of the escalating trade war between Washington and Beijing. NEWSCENTER begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Choi. North Korea-U.S. denuclearization talks, although it may take time, are on the right track. That's coming from President Moon Jae-in, who made the remarks during his summit with the President and Prime Minister of Singapore on day 2 of his 3-day state visit there. Our Chief Cheonggwa correspondent Moon Gun-young has our top story.
Despite possible obstacles down the road, North Korea-U.S. negotiations are on the right track. That's South Korean President Moon Jae-in as he held bilateral summits with the President and Prime Minister of Singapore. Standing in the city where exactly 1 month ago stood the North Korean leader Kim Dong-yeon and U.S. President Donald Trump for their historic summit, the South Korean leader carefully predicted that the June 12th summit may lead to success if North Korea implements complete denuclearization and the international community join efforts to guarantee security for the North.
영내 평화와 안정을 위해서도 공조를 강화하기로 했습니다.
Constructive dialogue is necessary in order to achieve peace and stability in the peninsula.
Such remarks come amid a possible gap between North Korea and the U.S. on how to move ahead with the denuclearization process, which became more apparent following U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's latest trip to Pyongyang. According to the South Korean leader's chief press secretary, President Moon also noted although working-level negotiations may take time, now is a better time than ever to finally rid North Korea of its nuclear mission. Another key point President Moon noted is what North Korea is demanding from the U.S. for its denuclearization measures. Not the removal of sanctions or economic compensation as in the past, but the end of hostile relations and trust. Analysts say it's a facilitator or negotiator in action trying to give the North Korea-U.S. denuclearization process a push forward as it appears to have hit a stall. Traveling with the South Korean president, Moon Gun-young, Arirang News, Singapore.
The two countries inked 3 major agreements in areas of trade, industry, and energy. These deals will not only affect the specific sectors, but also help lay the groundworks for greater exchanges and improve bilateral ties. For details, let's turn to our Oh Soo-young.
Seoul and Singapore have agreed to expand their cooperation in trade, industry and energy. South Korea's Trade Ministry said Thursday that Trade Minister Kim Dong-yeon and his Singaporean counterpart signed 3 memorandums of understanding during President Moon Jae-in's state visit to Singapore.
We believe that Singapore as a business, financial and logistics hub of Southeast Asia can play a pivotal role in expanding Korea's trade with other Asian countries. Singapore has contributed greatly to investing in South Korea's venture companies. The joint funds were created 3 times and all were carried out successfully. We hope to expand these kinds of funds in the future.
Under these agreements, the two countries plan to deepen their cooperation in developing state-of-the-art technologies in areas such as artificial intelligence, bio and medical products, and the Internet of Things. Seoul and Singapore will also seek to promote free trade on a bilateral and multilateral level, as both countries are members of the 16-member Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. The two governments plan to launch a committee to oversee progress on their bilateral free trade agreement within 6 months. They also agreed to jointly research and nurture smart grid systems in their countries for more energy efficiency, which could be commercialized for other markets, including those in the Asia-Pacific. The Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency and Korea Gas Corporation also concluded MOUs with local companies in Singapore on developing smart city projects and cooperating on LNG trading and swaps. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
President Moon also attended the South Korea-Singapore Business Forum. Emphasis was made on expanding cooperation between the two sides beyond economics. Hwang Ho-jun has more from that event.
In front of about 300 business leaders from both countries gathered at Singapore's Shangri-La Hotel, the South Korean president first praised the city-state for successfully hosting the Pyongyang-Washington summit last month, calling it a great achievement by not only North Korea and the U.S., but for Singapore as well.
한반도의 완전한 비핵화와 평화에 적극적인 지지와 성원을 보내주신 싱가포르 정부와 국민들께 깊이 감사드립니다.
President Moon also called for Singapore's active support for his new southern policy, especially with Singapore chairing the 2018 ASEAN summit. It was November last year when the South Korean president first introduced his vision to, quote, dramatically strengthen Seoul's cooperation with ASEAN nations by focusing on the 3 Ps: people-centered exchanges, mutual prosperity, and peace. President Moon highlighted 3 ways to bring about future-oriented cooperation between the two countries. He first said Korea and Singapore will secure future growth engines together in response to the 4th Industrial Revolution, especially by promoting the active participation of small businesses and innovative startups in the process.
싱가포르의 혁신 역량과 자본력에 한국의 세계적인 정보통신 기술이 결합하면 큰 시너지 효과를 만들어낼 수 있을 것입니다.
The president also emphasized that bilateral economic cooperation must work effectively to benefit the people of both countries, and that South Korea and Singapore must work together to prevent the spread of protectionism, noting that the foundation for the two countries' economic growth has been free trade and openness. President Moon Jae-in ended his speech with the expression Majulah Singapura, Malay for Onward Singapore. Even during the business forum, President Moon asked again for Singapore's continued support for establishing lasting peace on the Korean peninsula. He stressed if South Korea and Singapore go onward, or Majulah together, not only Korea but the entire ASEAN will enjoy peace and co-prosperity. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News, Singapore.
The first monetary policy meeting for the second half of this year was held by Korea's central bank today. While staying put on the key rate, the BOK lowered its economic growth projection. Kim Hye-sung breaks down the digits for us.
The Bank of Korea kept its inflation rate projection at 1.6%, but cut its growth forecast for the local economy to 2.9% from April's 3%.
We expect economic growth to continue at the level of its potential growth rate, but there is growing uncertainty over global trade conflict and the pace of monetary policy normalization by major economies.
The BOK chief said Korea's exports remain robust and that growing consumption will offset slowing investment in the country. But the bank said growing trade uncertainties and the escalating trade friction between the U.S. and China poses a risk to the South Korean economy and the financial market. With inflation also below its 2% target, the BOK left its key benchmark rate unchanged at 1.5%. South Korea's consumer price index gained 1.5% in June, the same as the previous month due to a fall in agricultural goods prices. Household debt concerns and the sluggish domestic labor market also led the bank to hold its key rate. Between January and June, a monthly average of 142,000 new jobs were added, marking the slowest growth since the 2008 global financial crisis.
Externally, growing trade protectionism is a downside risk to Korea. Domestically, slowing construction and facility investment, poor job data, and low demand-side inflation led to the bank's decision to hold rates again.
July's monetary decision leaves the U.S. interest rate 0.5% higher than that of Korea. But with the Fed expected to raise rates 2 more times this year, the BOK didn't rule out the possibility of a rate hike in the second half of this year, saying it'll closely monitor global market conditions and how the U.S.-China trade war affects the Korean economy. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
The number of added jobs remains in this decade's lowest level here in Korea. Top economic policymakers met today to look into the possible cause of this unwelcome trend. While discussing ways to turn things around, they agreed on the need to closely monitor Washington and Beijing's trade war. Won Jung-hwan has the highlights from that session.
South Korea's Finance Minister Kim Dong-yeon and the heads of ministries related to the economy have gathered together to discuss the urgent economic issues impacting the country. They started off with the recent jobs report, which was released on Wednesday. The latest job figures by Statistics Korea showed the country only saw its job growth remain in the 100,000 level in June, the fifth straight months it has been in that range. While confronting the issue of job creation, Kim drew up a set of measures to boost domestic demand during the second half of the year to help create more jobs in the country.
Job creation numbers are not good, and the employment situation is the worst since the financial crisis. Since the sluggish employment is closely related to our everyday lives, the figures are really depressing. The situation is not likely to improve in a short amount of time, so the creation of new jobs should be led by innovative growth.
During this meeting, the minister brought up the matter of the hike in the country's legal minimum wage. Kim mentioned the possibility that raising the minimum wage had a serious impact on the job front. He said there is a need to be more flexible regarding raising the minimum wage in the future. The minimum wage is expected to reach nearly $9 per hour by 2020. Another critical issue that was discussed during the meeting today was the escalating trade war between the United States and China. The government is worried because the growing trade spat between the world's two superpowers could wreak havoc on Korean exporters, as the US and China are Korea's top two export markets. 원정환, Arirang News.
An emergency meeting was held in Seoul's Defense Ministry this afternoon. The session focused mainly on a snowballing political interference scandal surrounding the military intel body. Park Ji-won shares with us what was discussed.
A closed-door emergency meeting took place on Thursday, attended by the nation's top military leaders, including Defense Chief Song Yang-moo, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Chung Kyung-do, as well as 5 civilian military experts. After the meeting, Seoul's Defense Ministry announced the military will focus on fundamental reform measures to its intel body to earn the public's trust again and will put its utmost effort to end military's illegal interference on domestic politics. Thursday's meeting was convened by the request of the civilian members of the Defense Ministry's Policy Deliberation Committee, as President Jaein ordered an independent probe into the Defense Security Command on Monday night.
The independent investigation team will uncover crystal clear truths about the recent allegations raised against the Defense Security Command, and if any unlawful acts are found, they will be processed according to the law.
The military intelligence body has come under fire as ruling party lawmaker Lee Chul-hee unveiled a series of inside documents of the Defense Security Command that showed it had engaged in inappropriate political actions during the Park Geun-hye administration. One of the documents showed that the intel body advised the president's office back in 2014 not to salvage the sunken Seoul ferry to evade negative public opinions. Another document suggested that the Intel Command had reviewed domestic law related to the mobilization of combat troops to quell protesters at peaceful rallies demanding former President Park's resignation over a power abuse scandal. Prior President Moon's order to form the independent probe, the Defense Ministry had already launched a task force to revamp the intel body in May. The chair of the TF said Thursday that they are closely watching the probe.
The investigation should be done while the military readiness is intact. We hope the investigation can reach its conclusion soon so that the Defense Security Command can find its place again.
The task force team is reportedly planning to announce its comprehensive reform proposals of the Military Intelligence Command following the conclusion of the separate and currently active independent probe. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Today at Panmunjom, representatives of Pyongyang and Washington were supposed to sit down for talks on returning the remains of American soldiers killed during the Korean War. But the North did not show up, leaving the U.S. side waiting. Park Hee-jun gets us up to speed with the developments.
Officials from North Korea were expected to meet today with UN officials representing the United States to discuss repatriating the remains of American troops who went missing in action during the Korean War. But it looks like the North stood them up. Returning the remains was something that North Korean leader Kim Dong-yeon promised to do when he met last month with U.S. President Donald Trump in Singapore. Talks on implementing the agreement were originally supposed to start Thursday morning at the truce village of Panmunjom, as agreed last week in Pyongyang by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and senior North Korean official Kim Yong-chol. But according to Yonhap News, citing a diplomatic source, the North Korean officials had not shown up for the meeting as of Thursday afternoon. The U.S. has already sent 100 wooden caskets to Panmunjom, which are on standby to carry the soldiers' remains back home. The agreement to return them was considered a huge step forward in building trust between Pyongyang and Washington. It's not known why the North Korean officials were not present, and it's also unclear whether the talks will be postponed to another date. But what is clear is that the no-show is not a positive signal for North Korea-U.S. relations. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
A top UN aid official traveled to North Korea this week. Upon completing its trip, Mark Lowcock expressed hopes of increasing humanitarian assistance to the Hermit Kingdom. Choi Si-young zooms in on the outcome of the first such visit in 7 years.
The UN's humanitarian chief, who wrapped up a 3-day visit to North Korea this week, says the UN hopes to increase its humanitarian assistance to the country. The UN's Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mark Lowcock, was the first UN humanitarian official to visit the North in 7 years. At a press conference on Wednesday in Pyongyang, he said that although Pyongyang has made significant advances, there are still many challenges ahead when it comes to health and sanitation.
But my focus is on the humanitarian issues. And the core humanitarian issues are around malnutrition, better water and sanitation, and more life-saving drugs and other medical supplies in hospitals like the ones I visited.
The UN estimates that almost half of the North Korean population, around 10.6 million people out of 25 million, need humanitarian assistance, especially in the countryside. In rural areas, the infant mortality rate is 20% higher than in the cities. Among children under 5, 20% have experienced stunted growth, and nearly half of children in rural areas don't have access to safe drinking water. Lowcock stressed that the UN will raise funds to meet those needs, something that's been difficult amid international sanctions on North Korea over its nuclear and missile development.
The UN is trying to raise $111 million to meet humanitarian needs in the areas I've talked about, health, water and sanitation, food security, for about 6 million people.
During the visit, Lowcock met with North Korea's ceremonial leader Kim Yong-nam and its Minister for Public Health, Jang Jun-sang. It's expected that they discuss the progress made over the past 20 years, and more importantly, the humanitarian needs that still exist. He also toured a food factory and a rehabilitation center for children and checked up on several aid projects. Choi Si-young, Arirang News.
As of last month, the number of North Koreans who defected to the South surpassed 30,000. More than 600 of them started their own businesses here. As Seoul and Pyongyang grow closer than ever before, they have the potential to play key roles in improving cross-border economic relations. Ko Ryun-hee gets us better acquainted with these entrepreneurs.
For Chun Geum-ju, a North Korean defector-turned-entrepreneur, being busy at 6 a.m. is nothing new. Chun, who came to South Korea in 2010, owns a flower online shopping mall, and she often stops by this flower market in the morning to get the best possible merchandise for her customers.
Today I bought these flowers. In the winter, they usually cost about $15 per bundle. However, I got them for only $3 today. I think it's a good deal.
As a North Korean defector who settled in the South, she was especially interested in the recent developments in inter-Korean relations. Chun believes defectors who have found a new life by becoming entrepreneurs like herself can change the South Korean public's perception towards them and contribute in improving mutual understanding.
Some North Korean defectors who started their own businesses were successful enough to be on television. I think defectors can build a more positive image by showing the South Korean public how they strive to make a living.
For Chun, as well as many other North Korean defectors, the work of non-profit organization is crucial, such as the Bridge International. The CEO of this organization says they have an important role to play in the future when the two Koreas prepare for economic cooperation.
North Korean defectors who have their own businesses can play a big role in the future because they're the ones who know well about both Korea's market economy. Also, successful entrepreneurs can help other defectors settle into new working environments. For example, they can give advice or even hire them.
The organization also believes South Korea can utilize the defectors when expanding the trade with China.
Our company distributes dried fish and we get the products from China. I started the business in this field because I had experience communicating with Chinese traders in North Korea.
Some say it is too early to discuss economic cooperation between the two Koreas, as international sanctions against the regime are still widely in effect. However, others say to achieve lasting peace on the Korean peninsula, efforts need to sprout from all levels of society, including defectors who are setting new lives for others like them to follow. 고륜이, Arirang News.
Over in Brussels, President Donald Trump said NATO allies agreed to increase defense spending by 2% of their GDP. Speaking at a NATO summit press conference, the American leader pointed out that because the U.S. has been paying, quote, probably 90% of the cost of NATO, he would have been unhappy if the allies did not agree to pay more. When asked whether he was threatening to pull out of NATO, Trump replied he could, but it's not necessary since allies agreed on more spending. Earlier, the U.S. commander-in-chief tweeted that all NATO nations must meet their 2% commitment and that must ultimately go to 4%. It's the moment of truth for soccer fans around the world. The 2018 FIFA World Cup in Russia boils down to just 2 teams. But before the finals, let's take a look back at the latest match. When France clawed its way past Belgium, it was a slow, low-scoring game, which is why fans were delighted by England and Croatia's numerous near misses, net scorchers, and plenty of other drama. Lee Seung-jae brings us the highlights.
Over 78,000 fans packed into Moscow's Luzhniki Stadium on Wednesday to watch England and Croatia square off for a spot in Sunday's World Cup final. With France already earning their place on Tuesday, would it be England making their first final since they won the tournament in 1966, or Croatia advancing to their first ever World Cup final? The first goal came quickly with Kieran Trippier's superb free kick in the 5th minute, giving England the early lead. That's how the score remained until the halftime, despite some strong pressing by the Croatians. The second half began with Croatia continuing where they left off. And in the 68th minute, the breakthrough came when Semej Vasiliko's long cross found Ivan Perisic open for the header to level things at 1 apiece. The match heads to extra time, where in the 109th minute, Mario Mandzukic is left wide open after a headed pass from Ivan Perisic as a Juventus striker slips his shot past England keeper Jordan Pickford for the 2-1 lead. Croatia's defense does the rest as the Eastern Europeans win and advance to their first ever World Cup final. The final 2, Croatia and France, will duke it out in Moscow early Sunday evening local time for the most coveted prize in world football. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, I hear the heat wave is in full swing.
Daniel, the heat stroke has become a problem with the hot weather sweeping the nation, and more areas have been put on alert, while the southern regions where it's hotter, those alerts have been upgraded to warnings. Now, the high humidity is playing a big part in making conditions worse, and tomorrow it's only expected to get hotter. As for the near cities of Korea like Beijing, it looks like it'll be a bit cooler tomorrow, but with few thunderstorms. Now, more and more regions are having tropical nights, which is when the night temperature doesn't fall below 25 degrees Celsius. Seoul just falls below at 24 degrees tomorrow, while the southern regions are at 25. Now, into the day, Seoul gets sunnier and up to 32, while Gwangju and Daegu hits up to 34 and 36 degrees. This weekend will be hotter than ever, and tropical nights are going to be more frequent as well. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
These are the stories we could pack into tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for staying with us.